The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of New Han-Suyong. Tae-ho Kim walked slowly to the university, carrying his worn leather bag filled with history books and notes. At 45 years old, he had spent most of his life studying the past, trying to understand how humanity had become so peaceful. The colony world of New Han-Sun was like most human settlements in the galaxy. Clean white buildings stood between green parks where children played quietly. Gardens bloomed with colorful flowers that humans had brought from Earth centuries ago. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh bread from the morning bakeries. Tae-ho entered the lecture hall where 30 students waited for him. They sat patiently, notebooks ready, faces calm and interested. These young humans had never known violence or war. They lived in a galaxy where humans were known as the peaceful ones, the thinkers and artists who had given up fighting long ago. Today we will talk about the Great Pacification, Tae-ho began, writing the words on the board behind him. 800 years ago, humanity chose to abandon warfare. We became a species devoted to peace, art, and learning. A student named Soo-jin Park raised her hand. She was 28 years old, with bright, curious eyes and short black hair. Professor Kim, why did we stop fighting? The old records show humans were very good at war. Tae-ho smiled gently. Because we learned that peace brings happiness. War only brings pain and death. Our ancestors were wise to choose this path. Soo-jin nodded but looked thoughtful. She had been studying ancient human sites across the galaxy, digging up old ruins and trying to understand the past. Sometimes she found things that did not match what the history books said far across the galaxy. In the command center of a massive warship, General Vextar studied star maps with his officers. The Zelanian Empire had been growing stronger for decades, taking over planets and systems from weaker species. Vextar was a tall creature with gray skin and forearms, each ending in sharp claws. His red eyes gleamed as he pointed to a cluster of stars on the map. The human colonies, he said with contempt. Look how they spread across space like flowers in a garden. No weapons, no defenses, no military at all. They will be easy to conquer. His second-in-command, Captain Yulthok, shifted nervously. General, the old records mention warnings about humans. Some species call them dangerous. Vextar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the command center. Dangerous? Look at them now. They paint pictures and write poems. They have not fought a war in 8 centuries. They are soft and weak. On another ship, Ambassador Crix floated in his water tank, his tentacles moving slowly through the liquid. The mollusk diplomat had lived for over 300 years and remembered stories. His elders told about the old days. Stories about humans that made him very afraid. You should not attack them, Crix bubbled through his translator. The ancient archives speak of terrible things. They call humans the sleeping war gods. Fairy tales, Vextar snorted. Not exist. Only power exists. We have more power than those peaceful humans. Back on New Han-Suyong, Soo-jin Park climbed down into the ancient ruins she had discovered outside the city. The underground chambers were older than the colony itself, maybe older than any human settlement on the planet. Strange symbols covered the walls, carved deep into black stone that seemed to absorb light. She ran her fingers over the symbols, feeling their rough edges. Her translation device struggled with the ancient language, giving her only partial meanings. But some words came through clearly. The binding, the great sleep, the sealed ones. What were our ancestors hiding? She whispered to herself. In the city above, Dong Wu Li sat in his office as the colony leader. At 67 years old, he was one of the oldest humans on New Han-Sun. His white hair was neatly combed, and his kind eyes looked out at the peaceful streets through his window. He'd spent his whole life keeping the colony safe and happy. But lately, he had been having strange dreams. Dreams of battles and blood, of humans fighting with weapons he had never seen. He woke up each morning feeling confused and disturbed. These dreams did not match anything he knew about human nature across the galaxy. Other humans were having similar experiences. Juan Choi, a gentle engineer on the mining world of New Busan, found herself staring at the equipment in her workshop with new eyes. Her hands moved on their own, making changes to the mining tools that turned them into something else. that looked almost like weapons. Harry Jung, a mother of 2 young children on the farming world of New Jeju, woke up in the middle of the night with her hands in fighting positions. She had been dreaming of teaching her children things they should never need to know. Ways to hurt other people, ways to kill. These humans did not understand what was happening to them. They had been raised in peace, taught that violence was wrong and unnecessary. But something deep inside them was stirring, like a giant waking up from a very long sleep. The Zilanian fleet moved through space toward human territory. Hundreds of warships filled with soldiers and weapons ready to conquer. Worlds that had no defenses. General Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars grow brighter as they approached their destination. "Prepare the bombardment weapons," he ordered. "We will start with their archaeological sites. If they want to remember their past, we will help them by destroying it." On New Hanseong, alarms began to sound. The peaceful colonists looked up at the sky with confusion as alien ships appeared in orbit. They had never seen warships before. Most of them did not even know what they were looking at. Taho Kim ran from his university to the colony center, his heart beating fast with fear. Dongwoo Lee was already there, trying to contact the alien ships. His peaceful words met only silence. Su-Jin. Park was still in the underground ruins when the first energy beam struck the surface above. The ancient chamber shook as rock and dirt fell from the ceiling. She looked up in terror as cracks appeared. In the carved walls, General Vextar smiled with satisfaction as his weapons destroyed the human archaeological sites across the planet. He did not know that buried beneath one of those sites was something that had been sleeping for 800 years. Something that the ancient symbols had warned about as the ruins collapsed around Sujin Park. One of the black stone walls split completely in half. Behind it was a chamber filled with soft blue light. In the center of that light was a crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. The crystal had been keeping something locked away. Something in the minds of every human in the galaxy. As the energy beam from above struck the crystal, it cracked, and the blue light began to fade. 800 years of peaceful sleep was about to end, and General Vextar had no idea what he had just awakened. The blue crystal lay shattered in pieces across the ancient chamber floor. Sujin Park crawled out from under the fallen rocks, her clothes torn and covered in dust. The soft blue light that had filled the room for centuries was gone, leaving only darkness and the smell of burning stone. Above ground, the bombardment had stopped. General Vextar stood on his ship bridge, satisfied with the destruction. The human archaeological sites were now smoking craters in the earth. His soldiers were already landing on the planet's surface, ready to begin the occupation. "The humans are not even fighting back," Captain Yilthek reported. "They are just standing in the streets looking confused." Vextar nodded with approval. "As expected, they have forgotten how to be warriors. This conquest will be easier than taking candy from a child." But something was changing across the galaxy. On New Busan, Ji-won Choi was working late in her engineering workshop when the headache started. It felt like someone was hammering inside her skull with a metal tool. She pressed her hands against her temples and tried to breathe slowly. Then the visions began. She saw herself as a child, but not the peaceful childhood she remembered. In these visions, she was learning to build weapons from scrap metal. Her hands knew how to turn mining equipment into tools of war. She watched herself design machines that could break through enemy armor and weapons that could destroy entire buildings. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, but her hands were already moving. Without thinking, she began taking apart the mining drill in front of her. Her fingers worked with skills she had never learned, reshaping the metal into something new. Something dangerous across the galaxy on New Jeju. Hei Rijung woke up screaming. Her husband Minho rushed to her side, but she pushed him away with strength that surprised them both. "The children," she gasped. "I need to teach the children." "Teach them what?" Minho asked, confused and frightened. Hiri looked at her hands. They were shaking, but not with fear. They were shaking with the need to move, to fight, to protect her family in ways she had never imagined. "How to survive," she said quietly. "How to kill." Her two young children, Sung-min and Na-young, appeared in the doorway. They looked at their mother with wide eyes, but something in their faces had changed too. They stood differently, like small animals ready to run or fight. On New Hanseong, Ho Kim sat in his office at the university, staring at books that no longer made sense. The history he had taught for 20 years suddenly felt like lies. The Great Pacification, the peaceful evolution of humanity, choice to abandon warfare, none of it felt real anymore. Images flashed through his mind like old movies. Humans, in armor fighting across alien worlds, battle strategies so complex they made his head spin. Weapon designs that turned simple tools into instruments of death. And through it all, a feeling of rightness, like this was who humans were supposed to be. His peaceful nature fought against these new thoughts. "This is wrong," he said out loud. "Humans chose peace. We are not warriors anymore." But his hands were already reaching for paper, drawing battle plans he had never studied. His mind was calculating supply lines and troop movements for a war that had not started yet. The Zilanian soldiers marched through the streets of New Hanseong's capital city. The humans they passed seemed harmless enough. Old people sat on benches watching them with curious eyes. Children played in the parks as if nothing had changed. Shop owners continued selling food and clothes to anyone who wanted them. But Captain Yothok noticed something that made his scales itch with worry. The humans were watching them too carefully. Their eyes followed every movement, noting weapons and weak points in armor. Even the children seemed to be studying the Zilanian soldiers like they were preparing for something. "General," he reported, through his communication device, "humans are acting strange. They are not afraid of us."
Of course not.
Vextar replied from his ship. "They have never seen real warfare. They do not know enough to be afraid." But Yulthkuk was not convinced. He had fought many species across the galaxy, and he knew the difference between ignorance and calculation. These humans were not ignorant. They were watching and learning and waiting. Colony leader Dong Wu Li requested a meeting with the Zilanian commanders. He walked slowly to the government building where they had set up their headquarters, his hands clasped behind his back like a peaceful old man. The soldiers at the door barely looked at him as he passed. Inside, General Vextar sat, behind Dong Wu's own desk, his forearms spread wide to show his dominance. "So you are the leader of this place?" he said with amusement. "You look even weaker than I expected." Dong Wu smiled gently and bowed his head. "We are a peaceful people, General. Do not wish to cause trouble. Good, then you will surrender. Your planet to the Zilanian Empire, your people will work for us now." "Of course," Dong Wu said. "We have no choice." But as he spoke, something was happening behind his calm eyes. Memories were surfacing that felt older than his own life, a knowledge of warfare and strategy that had been sleeping in his mind for decades. His peaceful exterior remained the same, but inside something ancient and terrible was waking up. Vextar dismissed him with a wave of his clawed hand. "Go tell your people they belong to us now." Dong Wu bowed again and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he stopped and looked back. For just a moment, his expression changed completely. The gentle old man was gone, replaced by something that made Vextar's blood run cold. "General," Dong Wu said quietly, and his voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "You have made a mistake." Before Vextar could respond, Dong Wu was gone. But his words echoed in the room like a promise of things to come. Across human space, the changes were spreading. On every world where humans lived, people were waking up from dreams that felt more real than their daily lives. Engineers were building weapons without knowing why. Farmers were turning their equipment into tools of war. Teachers were showing children things they should never need to know. Jin Park climbed out of the ruined archaeological site, carrying pieces of the broken crystal in her hands. The symbols on the chamber walls made sense to her now. The binding, the great sleep, the sealed ones. Humans had not chosen to become peaceful. Something had made them forget what they really were. She looked up at the alien ships in the sky and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. On his flagship, General Vextar received reports from across the planet. The conquest was proceeding perfectly. The humans offered no resistance. His soldiers had taken control of all major cities without firing a single shot. But then came a report that confused him. "General, something strange is happening. The humans have stopped what they were doing. All of them. They are just standing still and looking at us." Vextar moved to the observation deck and looked down at the planet. In every street and building, he could see the humans had indeed stopped moving. They stood like statues, their heads turned toward the sky where his ships waited. "What are they doing?" he muttered then, as if responding to a signal only they could hear. Every human on the planet turned at the same time. They were no longer looking at the sky. They were looking at the Zelanian soldiers on the ground, and in their eyes was something that had been sleeping for 800 years, something that was now fully awake. The silence on New Hanxiang was broken by a sound that made every Zelanian soldier's blood freeze. It started as a whisper, then grew louder and louder until it filled the air like thunder. The humans were singing. It was not a song of peace or surrender. The ancient words came from throats that had never spoken them before, but every human knew the meaning. It was a war song from the time before the Great Sleep, a song that promised death to enemies and victory to those who sang it, Captain. Yulthok pressed his communication device with a shaking claw. "General, the humans are singing something. It sounds like a battle cry from the old records." General Vextar listened to the transmission and felt something cold crawl up his spine. He had heard recordings of this song before in the deepest archives of conquered worlds. It was older than the Zelanian Empire itself. "Impossible," he muttered. "They cannot know those words. That language has been dead for centuries." But across the galaxy, on every world where humans lived, the same song was being sung at the same moment. Millions of voices joined together in perfect harmony, creating a sound that traveled through space itself. On the transport ship Peaceful Dawn, Captain Biora Shin felt the song rise from her throat without conscious thought. She had been carrying medical supplies between colonies when the Zelanian patrol ships surrounded her vessel. For 37 years, she had never harmed another living being. Now she looked at her ship's controls with new understanding. Her hands moved across panels she had never touched before, activating systems she did not remember installing. The Peaceful Dawn shuddered and changed. Hidden armor plates slid into place. Weapon ports opened along the hull. Medical transport revealed itself as something else entirely. "This is Zelanian Patrol Vessel Dominator," came a voice over the communication system. "Surrender your ship immediately, or we will destroy you." Biora Shin smiled as her fingers danced over weapons controls that felt familiar as breathing. "Is Captain Biora Shin of the Human Defense Fleet?" she replied, using a title she had never held before. "Prepare to learn why your ancestors feared us." The patrol ships fired first, but Biora was already moving. The Peaceful Dawn twisted through space in patterns that should have been impossible for a civilian vessel. Her weapons struck with precision that made the Zelanian pilots scream in terror. Within minutes, the patrol ships were floating debris. On New Jeju, 12-year-old Wu Jinhan sat at his school desk, drawing pictures that made his teacher back away in fear. The gentle boy who had never hurt an insect was designing weapons of war with the skill of a master engineer. His small hands sketched plasma cannons and armor-piercing shells that could punch through starship hulls. His mother, Hiri Jung, appeared in the classroom doorway. She no longer looked like the peaceful farmer who had raised vegetables and sung lullabies. Her eyes burned with purpose, and her hands carried materials she had gathered from around the farm. "Come, Wujin," she said quietly. "It is time to build." The boy looked up from his drawings and nodded. They understood each other perfectly now. Yet the time for pretending to be harmless was over. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on thousands of human worlds. The Jinkong, a biochemist on the research station New Seoul, stared at her laboratory equipment with sudden clarity. The machines used for healing could be turned to other purposes. Her gentle hands that had saved lives began mixing compounds that could end them. Kung Ho Lim walked through his fields on the agricultural world New Mokpo, but he was no longer seeing crops. His farming equipment could be weapons. His irrigation, Systems could be turned into delivery methods for things that grew in laboratories instead of soil. His peaceful farm was becoming a fortress. On New Hansung, the situation grew more dangerous by the hour. The Zelanian soldiers noticed that the humans were no longer shopping in markets or playing in parks. Instead, they moved with purpose through the streets, gathering materials and disappearing into buildings. Tae-ho Kim stood in his university office, surrounded by books that now made perfect sense. The history he had taught was not wrong, but it was incomplete. Humans had not chosen peace. They'd been forced to forget who they really were. His mind filled with tactical knowledge that felt older than civilization itself. Supply lines and battle formations, siege warfare, and fleet movements. He understood now why other species feared humans. It was not because they were violent. It was because they were too good at violence. Su-Jin Park emerged from the ruined archaeological site, carrying more than broken crystal pieces. She had found weapons buried beneath the planet's surface. Ancient human technology that had been waiting for someone to wake it up. The weapons hummed with power as her hands touched their controls. Dong Wuli called another meeting with General Vextar. The Zelanian commander was becoming nervous about the changes in human behavior, but his pride would not let him admit weakness. "Your people are acting strangely," Vextar accused, when the elderly human entered his office. Dongwu smiled the same gentle smile he had always worn. "We are a simple people, General. Perhaps we are just curious about our new masters." Something in his voice had changed. Each word carried weight like a hammer blow. Vextar found himself leaning back in his chair, though he could not say why. "Tell them to go back to their normal activities," Vextar ordered. Of course, Dongwu agreed, "but I should warn you about something, General. My people have been having strange dreams lately. Dreams about the old days when humans were different than we are now." "What kind of dreams?" Dongwu's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew cold as winter stars. "Dreams about war, General. Dreams about what happens to species that threaten human children." Far across space, Admiral Korth received disturbing reports from all over human territory. Patrol ships were disappearing. Supply convoys were being destroyed by vessels that should not have existed. And everywhere, humans were singing that ancient song. He opened the deepest files in the Zelanian military archives, records so old they were written in languages most of his people had forgotten. The warnings were there, buried under centuries of dust and neglect. "Beware the sleeping war gods," one record said. "They appear as gentle as children, but their dreams are made of blood and fire." Another file contained a single line that made Admiral Korth's hands shake. "Never wake the humans. Never." On New Handsaw, night fell like a curtain across the occupied world. The Zelanian soldiers huddled in their barracks, listening to the humans singing in the darkness outside. The song had changed throughout the day, growing darker and more threatening with each passing hour. Captain Yulthok stood guard duty on the government building roof, watching the empty streets below. But the streets were not truly empty. Could feel eyes watching him from windows and doorways, human eyes that reflected the starlight like the eyes of hunting animals. A sound made him turn. Dong Wuli stood behind him, though the old human had made no noise climbing the stairs. In the darkness, he looked different. Larger somehow. More dangerous. "Beautiful night, Dong Wu," said conversationally. Yulthik raised his weapon. But the human made no threatening moves. He simply stood there, smiling peacefully under the stars. "What do you want?" the Zelanian captain demanded. Dongwu looked up at the alien ships hovering above the city. "What?" "I want you to send a message to your admiral," he said quietly. "Tell him that humanity remembers what we are now. Tell him that the seals are breaking across the galaxy. Tell him that what happened here is just the beginning." "What seals? What are you talking about?" The old human turned to leave, but paused at the stairway. When he looked back, his peaceful mask had completely fallen away. What Yulthok saw in that moment would haunt his dreams for the rest of his short life. "Tell him," Dongwu said, in a voice like grinding metal, "that the war gods are waking up. And this time, we remember why the galaxy used to fear us." Thunder rolled across the clear night sky as every human on the planet spoke a single word. In unison, it was not spoken in any modern language, but every living being understood its meaning. War. The word war echoed across space like a bell tolling the end of peace. On every human world, the transformation accelerated beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. What had been gentle farmers and teachers and engineers were becoming something that made ancient nightmares seem tame. Admiral Korth stood in his flagship command center, staring at reports that made no sense. Entire Zelanian fleets were disappearing without sending distress calls. Supply lines that had been secure for decades were being cut by forces that should not exist. And everywhere, those cursed humans were singing their war songs. Communications officer reported with a trembling voice, "We are receiving a transmission from the Oracle station. Oracle Dex wants to speak with you immediately." Korth felt his heart skip a beat. Oracle Vex was the oldest living being in the galaxy, a creature so ancient that she remembered the time before most species had learned to speak. If she was breaking her centuries of silence, something terrible was happening. The hologram that appeared was barely recognizable as any known species. Oracle Vex looked like a mixture of crystal and living tissue, her form shifting between solid and transparent. Her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. "Fool," she whispered, and the word carried more contempt than any curse. "You have awakened them. After 800 years of blessed sleep, you have awakened the war gods." "I do not understand," Admiral Korth said, though fear was already growing in his chest. "They are just humans. They've been peaceful for centuries." Oracle Dex laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Peaceful. Child, you know nothing. I lived through the time of blood. I saw what they were before the Great Binding. Humans are not a species that chose peace. They are a species that was forced to forget war." On New Hanseong, Taeho Kim walked through the streets of his city, but he no longer looked like a gentle professor. His movements were sharp and purposeful. Behind him followed other humans who had once been shopkeepers and artists and gardeners. Now they moved like soldiers who had trained together for years. The Zelanian occupation forces had barricaded themselves in the government buildings, but they could feel the humans gathering outside. Captain Yulthik watched through reinforced windows as the crowd grew larger and more organized by the hour. "They are not attacking," he reported to General Vexter. "They are just standing there, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Yulthok swallowed hard. "I think they are waiting for us to make the first move, so they can show us what they have become." In the underground chambers beneath the city, Sujin Park worked with technologies that had been sleeping for centuries. The ancient human war. Machines responded to her touch like faithful pets welcoming their master home. Weapons that could crack planets hummed to life. Armor that could turn a human into a walking fortress began to assemble itself. But the most terrifying discovery was not the weapons. It was the knowledge that flowed into her mind as she touched each device. Tactical information, strategic planning, and engineering concepts that were so advanced they made her previous education seemed like finger painting. Humans had not just been warriors. They had been the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever seen. The farming world of New Mokpo Kyung-ho Lim stood in what had once been his vegetable garden. Now it was something else entirely. His irrigation systems had been converted into delivery networks for biological weapons. His grain silos had become missile launchers. His peaceful farm animals had been replaced by mechanical creatures that could hunt down enemies across continents. But the most disturbing change was in King Ho himself, as a gentle farmer who had spent 50 years growing food to feed hungry. People now smiled as he planned ways to starve entire worlds. His mind worked through siege tactics and planetary blockades. With the skill of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, Oracle Dex continued her warning to Admiral Korth, her ancient voice growing more urgent with each word. "The humans, you see now, are shadows of what they once were. Before the Great Binding, they conquered half the galaxy, not through superior numbers or better weapons, but through something far more dangerous." What? Intelligence, adaptability, the ability to turn any situation into a victory. They could take a mining tool and make it into a weapon. They could look at your strongest fortress and find 12 ways to destroy it. Own allies against you with nothing but words. On New Jeju, Hri Jung worked alongside her 12-year-old son, Woo Jin Han, in what had once been their family workshop. The boy's drawings had become blueprints for weapons that made adult engineers weep with admiration. But more importantly, he was designing systems of warfare that combined technology with psychology. "Mother," the boy said without looking up from his work, "the aliens think like hunters. They believe strength comes from size and numbers." Hiri nodded as she assembled components that would turn their house into a fortress capable of holding off an army. "Yes, they do not understand that true strength comes from thinking. Should we teach them?" His mother smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Admiral Korth would have seen in his nightmares. "Oh yes, my son, we will teach them everything." Across human space, the awakening reached its full power. On the research station, New Seoul, Jin Kong had transformed her biochemistry laboratory into something that would have impressed the most ruthless weapons designers in galactic history. But she was not just making poisons or diseases. She was creating tools of psychological warfare that could break enemy morale without firing a single shot. Bora Shin's transport ship had joined with other civilian vessels to form a fleet that moved through space like a school of predatory fish. They struck at Zelanian supply lines and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. But they were not just destroying ships. They were studying their enemies, learning their weaknesses, and sharing that knowledge with every human in the galaxy. Humans were not fighting a war. They were demonstrating their mastery of war itself. Oracle Dex's voice grew softer, more dangerous. "The worst part, Admiral, is that they are not even trying yet. What you see now is just them remembering who they are. When they decide to actually fight, your entire empire will last perhaps 3 standard days. That is impossible. We have millions of soldiers, thousands of ships. They have something you cannot understand. They have the ability to make every single thing in the galaxy into a weapon pointed at your heart." On New Hanzeong, the moment of decision arrived. General Vexstar, driven by pride and desperation, ordered his forces to attack the gathering humans. Energy weapons fired into the crowd, expecting to see the peaceful colonists scatter in terror. Instead, the humans moved like water, flowing around rocks. They had known the attack was coming before Vexstar had even given the order. Some seemed to simply step slightly to the left or right, letting the energy beams pass harmlessly by. Others caught the weapon fire on devices they had built from kitchen utensils and farming tools. Then they struck back. What happened next was not a battle. It was a demonstration. The humans showed the Zelanian forces exactly why their species had once been called the War Gods. Every movement was perfect. Every strategy was flawless. Every action led to the complete destruction of enemy positions while protecting innocent life. In less than an hour, the most advanced military force in Zelanian history had been reduced to scattered survivors hiding in ruins. Dongwu Li walked through the wreckage, his white hair now streaked with smoke, but his expression peaceful once again. He found General Vexstar cowering behind an overturned vehicle, his forearms trembling with terror. "Now, do you understand?" the old human asked gently. Vexstar could only stare in horror at the being who had once seemed so harmless. "We tried to warn you," Dongwu continued, "but you would not listen. Now, you will carry a message back to your people. Tell them that humanity is awake. Tell them that we remember what we are. And tell them that this galaxy belongs to us now." Above them, Admiral Korth's massive fleet approached the planet, ready to show these upstart humans the true meaning of overwhelming force. He had no idea that he was about to learn why the humans had once been the most feared species in existence. Admiral Korth's massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace around Earth like a metal storm. 5,000 ships filled the space above humanity's homeworld, carrying enough firepower to crack the planet's surface. The Admiral stood on his command bridge, confident that this show of overwhelming force would end the human problem once and for all. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. "Turn their world into a warning that other species will remember for 1,000 years." But as his weapons charged, something impossible happened. The planet below began to change. President Sarah Myung stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, her hands moving across controls that had been waiting 800 years for someone to activate them. She had been a peaceful diplomat just days ago, negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Now strategic knowledge flowed through her mind like water through a broken dam. "Activate the planetary defense grid," she commanded, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across the galaxy. Above ground, what the Zelanians had thought were cities began to rise from the earth. Massive towers of metal and crystal stretched toward the sky, revealing themselves as weapon platforms that had been hidden beneath parks and schools. Buildings folded open like flowers to expose cannon barrels the size of subway tunnels. The entire planet had been a disguise. Every human colony world, every peaceful settlement, every gentle farming community had been a military installation waiting for the right moment to wake up. Admiral Korth watched in horror as his sensors showed readings that made no sense. "How is this possible? Our intelligence said they had no weapons." His tactical officer's voice shook as he reported, "Sir, the energy readings from the planet's surface are beyond our scale. We have weapons down there that could destroy our entire fleet? Impossible. Begin the attack now." The Zelanian fleet fired everything they had at Earth. Enough energy to boil oceans and melt. Continents streaked down toward the blue and green world below. But the weapons never reached their targets. Defensive. Barriers made of pure energy surrounded the planet like a glowing shell. The Zelanian attack struck the barriers and simply disappeared, absorbed and redirected into space. Then, Earth struck back. Beams of light reached up from the planet's surface and touched Zelanian ships with gentle precision. The alien vessels simply stopped working. Their engines went quiet. Their weapons powered down. Their life support systems continued to function, but every offensive capability was neutralized in seconds. "What did they do to us?" Admiral Korth demanded. The answer came from every communication channel at once. A human voice spoke in perfect Zelanian, but also in the languages of every other species in the galaxy. It was President Sarah Myung, and somehow every being in known space could hear her words. "Apple of the galaxy," she said, and her voice was calm as a summer morning. "Humanity is awake. We remember what we are. Now we remember what we were, before others tried to make us forget." On New Hansol, Kim walked through the streets of his city, but now he wore the uniform of a war master. The peaceful professor was gone, replaced by a strategic genius who could see patterns in warfare that other species could not imagine. Behind him marched humans who had once been teachers and shopkeepers. Now moving with the precision of the most elite military units, General Vexstar was brought before him in chains, his forearms bound and his pride shattered. The Zelanian commander, who had thought humans were weak, could only stare at the being who had once seemed so harmless. "You destroyed our archaeological sites," Tejo said conversationally. "Do you know what those sites really were?" Vexstar could not speak. They were monitoring stations, built to watch over the seals that kept us asleep. When you destroyed them, you broke the locks on our true nature. Ho smiled, and it was not a cruel expression. "We should thank you." Across the galaxy, the awakening reached its final stage. Biora Shin's fleet of converted civilian ships moved through space like the hand of death itself. But they were not destroying Zelanian forces. They were capturing them, studying them, learning everything about their enemies' capabilities and weaknesses on New Jeju. Harry Jung and her son Woo Jin Han stood before a machine they had built from farm equipment and childhood toys. The device hummed with power that could rewrite the laws of physics and local space, but they were not using it as a weapon. "Show them, Mother," the 12-year-old boy said. Harry activated the machine, and suddenly every Zelanian ship in the system found itself surrounded by images. It's not threatening images, but memories. The machine projected the true history of humanity directly into alien minds. They saw humans as they had been before the Great Binding. Warriors who could turn defeat into victory with nothing but intelligence and determination. Engineers who could build weapons from anything they found. strategists who could outthink entire civilizations. But more importantly, they saw humans as protectors. The galaxy had not feared them because they were cruel. The galaxy had feared them because they were unstoppable when defending what they loved. Oracle Vex watched the awakening from her ancient station, her crystalline form flickering with something that might have been relief. She opened communication channels to every world in the galaxy and spoke the words that would be remembered forever. "The age of chaos is ending," she said. "The war gods have returned, but they are not here to conquer. They are here to bring order to a galaxy that has forgotten how to behave." On Earth, President Yang continued her broadcast to the galaxy. "For 800 years you allowed us to sleep because you were afraid of what we might do if we woke up. You were right to be afraid, but for the wrong reasons." Images flowed from Earth to every inhabited world, showing the true extent of human preparation. Every colony was a fortress, every civilian ship was a warship in disguise. Every peaceful farmer and teacher and artist had been a sleeping warrior waiting for the right moment to wake up. "We did not forget how to make war," President Yang explained, "simply chose not to. But that choice was taken from us by others who thought they knew better. Now we choose again." Admiral Korth found his voice at last. "What do you want from us?" The answer came not just from Earth, but from every human world simultaneously. Millions of voices speaking as one. Peace. Real peace. Not the peace of the weak hiding from the strong, but the peace that comes when everyone knows that bad behavior will be stopped by those who have the power to stop it. The Zilanian Empire surrendered within hours, not because they were defeated, but because they finally understood what they were facing. Every other aggressive species in the galaxy followed suit when they saw what had happened to the Zilanians. But the humans did not establish an empire. Instead, they became something the galaxy had never seen before. Protectors who asked for nothing in return, except that everyone behaved like civilized beings. Years later, Taeho Kim stood in his classroom again, teaching history to a new generation of students. But now his students included young beings from dozens of species, all learning together in peace. "Why did humanity agree to sleep for so long?" asked a young Zilanian student. Her scales still bright with youth, Taeho smiled the same gentle smile he had always worn, but now there was something else behind it, something that promised terrible consequences for anyone who threatened his students. "Because even gods need to rest sometimes," he said. "But more importantly, we needed to learn the difference between strength and wisdom. Now we know that true strength is not about winning every fight. It is about making sure the fights never need to happen." Outside the classroom window, children from a dozen different species played together in the garden. Human children taught alien youngsters how to build things. Alien children showed humans how to sing songs in languages that sounded like music. The galaxy was at peace, not because everyone was weak, but because everyone knew that the strongest guardians in existence were watching over them. And somewhere in the depths of space, new seals were being built. Not to make humans forget what they were, but to ensure that when they needed to remember, they would be ready. The war gods slept again, but this time they slept by choice. And their dreams were of peace that would last forever, because now, finally, everyone knew what would happen to anyone foolish enough to break it.